Musk will be launching the Facebook translation. So hello everybody. And now we have live streaming on Facebook as well. Hello dear participants, hello dear attendees. Today we are doing day 4 of European SpringStream2020, a mini conference for Christian content creators. It's hard to pronounce it, but this is it. And today we'll be talking about financial survival and thriving in the age of coronavirus, in the new normal. And I don't even know how to say it correctly. Is it the new normal or a new normal? So I think we can discuss it today as well. And so we'll be talking about how this new normal might look like for us, for the publishers and for the writers and for the editors as well. And today we have 2 wonderful and really interesting panelists with us. So we have Sam Richardson. Sam is CEO at SPCK. SPCK is one of big British publishing organizations. And both panelists today are from the UK. Our other panelist is Tim Thornborough, who is the founder and publishing director at Good Books Company, which is also a British publishing house. And I think it's really good to talk to Brits today, because we know that the restrictions are still there and the situation is still challenging. And so it will be interesting to hear your response. So Sam, before was in commercial publishing, and he joined SPCK in 2014, I'm right? Yes, I'm right. And he has 3 sons and a wonderful wife, who is called Sarah. And Tim has background in journalism, like deep background.
Yes, slightly weirdly, I was also a professional dancer at one stage. So
if we have time, we can do a dance.
I'd have to move the furniture again. Yeah, professional dance to journalism to Christian publishing. Yeah.
And Tim has 3 adult daughters, and his wife's name is Kathy.
Yeah.
Hello, Sam. Hello, Tim. And you're both the leading people in your organizations, and I'm sure that you need to tackle many financial questions as well. So when the corona crisis started, what was your first reaction? Did you decide to change something in your organization? What was your first reaction? So maybe Sam can start.
I think the very first reaction was a sort of anxiety for the people who might be directly affected by it, in the sense of being ill, whether that's authors or staff members. So I think the very first reaction was towards prayer. But then in terms of the more direct topic of this webinar, I think the first reaction was to try and understand how other people were viewing the situation. So we started looking at articles. An article that we've looked at a lot was one by Andy Crouch, who's an IVP author, called Leading Beyond the Blizzard. And that article outlined 3 different sort of scenarios for this current crisis. One was that it's just like a blizzard that will go away quite quickly. One was that it's like a winter that will go away, but in a considerably longer period of time. And one was that this is a bit like a mini ice age, and in fact, there'll be a new normal which will look quite different to what we've been used to. And so we've been trying to think in terms of, okay, what are the possible scenarios? Because I still think it's probably too early to try and box ourselves into one very clear understanding of where things are going to land.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Tim, and what about you?
I think we had we'd started thinking about it. I checked back in my emails actually, and I think it was early January when I had first emailed the rest of the directors here with just some thoughts about, what if this is actually bigger than many people are thinking about it. The key thing that we came to as we met and started talking about it was we needed to keep our warehouse working. Basically, the whole enterprise falls apart if we're unable to send books out to people, either in the trade, or we have a very significant proportion of direct to public sales in the Good Book Company. We're much less dependent on trade, but everything falls to bits if the warehouse is closed down. So the first thing we did actually was to split the warehouse team into two and put them team one on 1 week, a gap at the weekend so that any residual virus would die out, and then team two on the following week. Then if any one person succumbed to the virus, we could take that whole team off and put the other team on full time while they isolated and recovered. And that in fact is what happened. Our warehouse manager Felipe, who's a brilliant Brazilian, came down with the virus sort of in the third week of this operation, and they were out for 3 weeks while the other team took over. And we actually also had a plan to basically suck in everybody in the organization. If team two went down, then the editors and the customer service people and the marketing team would make a warehouse team to continue with the picking, the packing, the sending out. So that was the key response from us. Keep the warehouse moving at all costs.
So it's really good crisis management on your part.
We worked it out together. I mean, we there's a group of 5 directors, and we basically manage it as a team. Although I'm called the publishing director, I founded the company. I'm not the managing director. We do it as a team effort.
Sam, and did teamwork help SPCK to decide how you will be acting in the present situation?
Yeah, our management setup is quite different to Tim's. So we're a charity, so we have trustees effectively above me, and then we have a senior management team effectively below me. So we're sort of, so for me it's about trying to manage in 2 directions, and the trustees are obviously concerned particularly about the risks to the organisation as a whole in the long term and to its ability to fulfil its mission in the short term. And then staff will obviously have those questions, but they'll also have questions about how does this affect my own role? How does this affect how my own role is going to work? So for us, with an office in London and most people commuting on public transport, and with our warehouse being outsourced, it was quite obvious to us that we needed to move quickly to a position where we could be confident that we were going to be able to close our office and carry on operationally from a remote environment. So we were actually all ready to shut our office about 10 days before we were actually mandated by the government to shut our office. And we did shut our office, I think, 3 days before we were mandated to, just because we felt that would give us the chance to hopefully identify any of the teething problems that we hadn't thought about. But I think we were fortunate in that we were able to get the right technology into people's hands, and we'd invested a lot in our IT over the previous 18 months that enabled us to shift a lot of systems onto the cloud. So I think operationally we're feeling actually there's no big need to rush back into the office. But I think that's probably a combination of providence and good planning that we'd been able to get to that position. And we've tended to have a more outsourced setup in terms of things like distribution. So our setup is different to Tim's in that we rely on a big warehouse in Swansea, and again they've worked very hard to be able to remain open through this crisis.
So it's really interesting. Both companies answered with quick reaction, and it was quick response. It was early response and planning.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing was the for us additionally was the IT, and our IT team worked really hard to get people set up safely and effectively from home. The editorial team moved out, the customer service people moved out, still working from home, and the designers actually working from home, which presents a much bigger issue, because when you're handling large files on a server, as the designers and the editors, some of the editors are, there are very specific technical issues that need solving in order to make them work efficiently. But again, we'd been thinking about that and planning for it from the early days, and it's worked very effectively. Slightly frustrating server access, but that's just a bandwidth thing. I was saying to people that I thought I probably had to work 20% harder to achieve 20% less. Yeah, exhausted in the evenings.
This is the gist of present crisis. Well, we can do anything. But both of you had really early reactions to Corona crisis, and you did analyze the market. So how do you feel? What is the new normal for the general book market and the Christian book market? Are those two new normals different, or they're similar?
I mean, I think the general wisdom is that I think coronavirus hasn't changed the market, but it has accelerated the trends that were already there. I think, you know, one interesting thing is that ebooks have you know, risen in popularity. I don't have any clear sense whether that will continue after lockdown finishes, because we've seen this before with ebooks. You know, when ebooks became a thing, all publishers had to change the way they did their production processes to include ebooks in the system, and for a time, everybody thought, well, they're just going to take over completely, and you know, we're going to be left with warehouses we don't need, print skills that are redundant because everybody's going to be, you know, reading books on an iPad, and then sales of ebooks. I mean, there were percentage sales of ebooks, which I think crawled up to around 25, 26, 27% of all book sales in the UK. But even within that, it was often very specific kinds of titles. And since the peak in, I think it's about 2015 or 14, the actual percentage of ebooks has been declining, gradually declining.
It was.
As people have realized that actually, you know, taking half a dozen novels to the beach on your iPad is a good thing, but actually a lot of people love a physical book in their hands, and you know, there's been a sort of return to physical tree books as opposed to ebooks, as we call them. Now, ebooks have had a bounce, obviously, as bookshops are closed, as you know, people have been looking for things to read during lockdown, and the only way they can get access to them, or the easier way to get access to them, is via ebook. But I have no sense of whether that is something that will persist beyond lockdown, or whether it will be another bump and will return to normal. Sam, do you have a view on that?
I think you're absolutely right that the physical book is extraordinarily resilient, both as an object and as a sort of business model. And I think if ebooks do carry on where they are, they're still very much a minority rather than a majority form of reading. I think what's probably less resilient is the whole bookshop ecosystem, whether that's the general bookstores or whether that's the specialist Christian bookstores. And I'm much more, in one sense, I'm much more worried about their ability to bounce back, particularly the Christian bookstores, which have already run on very narrow profit margins. And some of their customers probably will have already created new habits over the last 3 or 4 months of buying from online places instead of buying from there. So I suspect the shift we may see is more the shift of physical book buying from the high street to the internet, as opposed to a shift from physical to ebook in the medium term. That's my guess. But again, I think as you said, it's quite early to be making calls. But I think being able to make sure you can distribute effectively to the internet channels, I think is again a trend. As you say, I think we're seeing accelerated trends, and I think that's something we already knew was important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now it's looking even more important, both for physical books and for ebooks.
And talking about accelerated trends, I think this is it. The crisis is a big test for every publisher and for every author as well. But with those accelerating trends, did you notice that some of your distribution channel worked much better than the other ones? And did you have any surprises, or everything was like predictable for you?
I mean, we both have, I think, distribution networks in America. We have an office of our own in Charlotte, and we distribute through a big organization called Baker and Taylor, B&T. B&T managed to keep their warehouses open, but Amazon basically stopped sending out books for 2, 3, 4 weeks, and
surprising.
Well, that was because they were focusing on necessities, and that's entirely understandable. People ordering food kind of come above people ordering books to read, or people ordering toilet paper. You could, of course, use the books for that purpose, but and then in America, Christian book discounts, a very big internet sales channel, CBD, also closed their warehouse. They've reopened again, but that they are two enormous routes in America to market, and they basically closed on us. In some ways, we can see the benefits of that in the sense that the books that people wanted, they then started coming to our own website to buy direct from us. And as our fulfillment house, B&T, was open, remained open, that was actually kind of better for us. We might have lost volume, but we gained profit margin because
of direct sales.
Yeah, because they're direct sales. So, and of course, we acquire new customers that way who otherwise would be invisible to us through some of these other channels.
Yeah, so it was a good thing for you. And Sam, and what about SPCK?
Yeah, I think, as Tim says, the ability to have multiple routes into market is important, because I think it was relatively difficult to predict that Amazon would have had the shutdown that it had. It wasn't quite as drastic in the UK, but we saw significant reductions in volume to Amazon in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And then as they sort of got things back on their feet, we've then seen strong increases from Amazon over the past 5 or 6 weeks. But I think that was quite difficult to predict. And similarly, we saw a shift to our own supply channels. And we've also seen a big increase in the books that are going through print-on-demand programs in various different places around the world. So I think it's always slightly difficult to know exactly where those books end up. But I think having sort of multiple routes to market is becoming increasingly important in a unpredictable world. I don't think we can necessarily predict which channels will remain open. We can be pretty confident about the ebook channel, but beyond that, I think the need to reduce our reliance on particular channels, which I think US-based publishers particularly, where Amazon is often over half of their market, I think that's been particularly an eye-opener for them. We're slightly more diversified, with rights also being an important income channel. But I think the ability to have multiple different ways of getting your books out there has proved increasingly crucial for us.
But I'm sure that in this situation, yeah, Tim?
Yeah, I was going to say a phrase I use all the time with in talking to other publishers, and particularly to people young in publishing, is this phrase: "Distribution is destiny." It's a common phrase in business, but basically, I think a lot of people come into Christian publishing because they're passionate about the book and the editorial. I meet a lot of people who become involved in Christian books because they're writers themselves, or they have a passion for a certain message, and often they don't come with the sort of the fundamental business skills, which are to make someone who creates books into a real publisher. A real publisher isn't someone who creates books. A real publisher is someone who creates books, is able to communicate their existence and the message to an audience, and deliver them to the audience at the price that they want. And that's it's a rounded view of what being a publisher is. So I'm always saying to editorially driven people, distribution is destiny. How are you going to get these books to the people who you know will find them beneficial and like them? And I think one of the big lessons from this experience that Sam's articulated so well there, if you don't cultivate multiple routes to market, you will always be vulnerable to a change in market conditions. Something goes down, a business goes down, suddenly your whole business can go down as a result of it, because it's the only way you can get your books to the market. So
in a way, we should limit our passion for our product and start thinking more broadly about accessibility of our product.
Stay passionate about your product by all means, but cultivate the skills which will make you a good publisher, rather than an enthusiastic sort of amateur in many ways. Yeah,
it's a good advice, especially for the small publishers, because the small publishers, we tend to be more passionate about the product, and I think it's a very important one. But thinking about this, so I'm sure that you had early reactions, and you also thought about investing, because a publishing house can't live without investing. So cash flow, it's important. And one question is, so how did you keep your cash flow going? And the other question related to finances, what about did you need to change your investing strategies, or rethink them at least?
I think for us, we were sort of caught in a growth phase during coronavirus. So we were kind of caught in an investment phase over the past 5 years or so. We've doubled in turnover. So we've been in the process of investing in quite a few things to support and continue that. So I think for us, when you suddenly enter a crisis that you're not sure where you're going, and I think we're still not sure where we're going, I think at that point, the need is to make sure you don't get yourself boxed in strategically. And so I think for us, that meant identifying, okay, which investments are really critical, particularly in terms of the short term and in terms of being able to generate a quick income, and which are the investments that we might be looking to put on hold, either because the market is changing and we're not sure whether they'll still be relevant, or simply because we need to keep cash in hand in order to have strategic options further down the line. So in January and February, we wrote an annual plan which had about 70 or 80 different things on that we wanted to achieve. And then in April, as an SMT, we looked at it and we decided, okay, these are I think there were 11 things that we decided we wanted to do in the next 2 months. And most of them were around ramping up the number of titles that we had on print on demand, making sure that we were on various key digital routes to market that previously we'd been a bit concerned about because of piracy. And so it was those kind of things that we were suddenly shifting to investments that would make a short-term impact rather than investments which would make a long-term impact.
So Tim, and what about the Good Book Company?
Yes, likewise, we'd also actually planned for a deficit budget this year in order to fund growth in all kinds of ways. It's very easy to panic, and I suspect Sam and I are in a more unique position in the sense that we are both part of mature businesses that have some cash reserves in place, so we're less vulnerable to, or we're less vulnerable to panic because we know that there is some petrol in the tank. We won't run out immediately.
You're like Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, well, so I mean, again, it's a standard accountancy saying that I use with people, which is turnover is vanity. In other words, you can be selling a lot and have a big turnover, 8, 9, 10 million, but for an accountant, turnover is not so important. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. Am I still trading profitably? Am I selling books at a profit? Is my cost base too high for the sales I'm achieving? And then cash is reality. Turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality. You can have a business with a huge turnover that goes broke because it's not profitable. You can have companies which are profitable in theory on paper that go broke because they simply run out of money and don't have a line or a credit line to any more of it. So any financial strategy has to think very carefully about those 3 aspects, particularly the cash. Now, we've in the UK we've had a number of kind of spectacular failures of Christian publishers, which have largely been around those accounting questions, running out of cash, because something was wrong structurally, or the cost base was wrong. And I think, funnily enough, Christian organisations can be prone to this, and it's kind of a slight naivety in thinking that because we're Christian, the Lord will look after us. Because we're Christian, we want to do good things, and therefore we want to be generous, which is a good instinct to have. But I think if you're running a business, you need to do so you need to be generous from a position of strength,
and
because
cash-wise,
you're employing lots of people, lots of families depend on you, and you need to be looking after them. Now, we've completely rebudgeted. We didn't quite tear up the old budget, but we've gone through a huge process of rebudgeting. We lost a lot of costs, a lot of travel costs, but we have not. Apart from, I think, just 2 people, we've furloughed 2 people, but everybody else has stayed on track. We've even employed someone new, a new post during the crisis, and we've decided that we want to continue with our publishing program, The big thing we have adjusted, however, are the sales forecasts for different kinds of books. And in general, our trade books we have printed fewer of because we've been less certain of, that certain titles would do as well as we had originally thought. So we've adjusted print volumes. Others, like children's titles, are doing exceptionally well for us at the moment. Lots of people at home with children needing books to read to their kids. So we've actually increased the print run on some of our children's products. So yeah, and scraped into the corners to find savings wherever we can.
Sam, did you also think about, did you also have to think about cost reductions in SPCK, at SPCK?
Yeah, I think, as Tim says, some of them kind of come automatically in terms of travel costs, for example. I think other areas are obvious, but you have to be a bit more deliberate. So, for example, print-based marketing. Most newspapers, for example, are still charging the same, even though they're only getting out a third or a quarter as many of the copies. So there's various types of marketing that suddenly become unworthwhile. But a lot of that we've shifted to alternative digital channels rather than give up on marketing, because as with the Good Book Company, we wanted to carry on our publishing program. We feel we can still get books to market. We found online events to be a really good way of promoting books and much more cost effective than doing physical events where you're paying for venue and you're paying for food and drink and so on. So that's sort of another saving that's emerged. In terms of cash savings, yeah, we've generally been more cautious on print runs than we have been in the past. Again, especially for the books that were the kind of books we'd be able to get into Waterstones and those kind of places. We've pulled in those kind of things. I see there's a question from Tony around, can you describe your current sales forces? So we have two people who go around bookshops visiting them basically, and they've both been on furlough for the past 6 weeks or so, and we're hoping to have them back in action quite soon. And we also have two people in the office who do customer services, and we've very much sort of pivoted their roles in the short term away from dealing with phone calls from bookshops, because those phone calls aren't happening, and towards making sure that they're ploughing through the backlist in terms of ebook conversion and in terms of print on demand to make sure that the long tail is fully available. So that's actually an area that's cost us a bit more, but we feel is worthwhile in the short term. In terms of radical cost savings, redundancies, and those kind of things, I think we feel it's still too early to take a view on whether those kind of things will be necessary. Because we've made the short-term savings in terms of cash, we've bought ourselves a bit of strategic space to take a view on, okay, what might this look like in 6 or 12 months' time? Will we want to be smaller? Will we want to be bigger? At the moment, fortunately, we don't have to answer that question immediately, because I think there's a big risk of being too radical at this point and then boxing yourselves into a space strategically, either by being too aggressive or by being too passive, that turns out to be the wrong strategy.
So you're watching the situation closely and to be able to make any decisions in future.
Yeah, and we're trying to sort of keep an eye on various different potential scenarios. Which direction do sales seem to be returning to normal, or do they seem to be carrying on at a lower level? And we're trying to keep an eye on these things, but we're trying to keep back the risk of making big decisions by second guessing things that the very best economists and the very best scientists don't know the answer to. I think you can waste a lot of mental energy trying to predict things and trying to pretend to your team that you know all the answers. And for us, our approach in terms of communications has been much more, this is what we're doing now. We don't have any delusions that we know exactly what the future is going to look like. So let's build the bridge as we walk along it.
Thank you. And you both mentioned that your publishing houses are in better situation. You are bigger than many of our participants, because I think the audience of MAI-Europe, there are small publishers. Many of them are small publishers. But you also have a great amount of experience in publishing. So what advice can you give in the present situation to the smaller publishing houses that don't have too much oil in their tanks.
One thing I'd say very quickly is that I'm not sure being bigger does necessarily mean you're in a better situation for this kind of scenario. I think it generally means you're carrying a large amount of fixed costs and you're carrying a large amount of cultural baggage. So I think my encouragement for smaller publishers, and in fact for large publishers, is how can you, particularly for small publishers, how can you take advantage of your smallness and your agility to be able to do things that are responding quickly to the market? What are the kind of books that people are going to want now, or in 3 months, or in 12 months' time? What are the kind of subjects that we know are suddenly becoming important? What are the kind of partnerships that you might be in a position to develop more quickly than a slow lumbering player like SPCK? So I think for me it's all about agility and how can you take advantage of your of a more agile nature than some of us might have.
Thank you. Tim, do you have anything to add? Sure you do.
Well, SPCK has a long and distinguished history. I started the Good Book Company in my front room in 1991. And so I do have direct experience of running a small business, basically myself, for 2 years. Took on people slowly, bit by bit, and office space bit by bit. I mean, there are no easy answers there for I think for a small business. I basically double worked for 10 years. I had another job as well as the Good Book Company, and didn't take a salary or any money from the business for 7 years in order to fund the growth, basically. I agree with Sam about agility. I'd add to that, you always need to be thinking about building your audience, and if the future is not substantially via trade, then working out how you can build your direct-to-consumer audience is very important. And what you can be giving them, and how you can be serving them. I mean, I think the bottom line for both of us, I know this is true for Sam, certainly true here, is where we are businesses, so we want to run ourselves professionally and efficiently and intelligently, but we may have a business head, but we also have ministry hearts. Our desire is to serve the church. We want to give Christians the kind of input and books and help they need to be disciples for Christ in the modern world, and to serve Him. So we've actually sort of given a load of stuff away during this period. We cut the price on our children's books pretty universally by 50% in order just to encourage and help people. We've been trying to offer things through our blog and online that will be helpful to people, and we haven't done that cynically, although it would be easy to think, actually, cynically, we are actually building an audience by doing that, by people thinking, oh, the Good Book Company, they were really helpful and they did some great things for us while we were all in trouble. We haven't done it for that reason, but that's that's going to be one of the long-term results we hope for the way we've behaved during the crisis. I see a question there. Tony's asked.
So we have a few questions also. So we have a question for Tim from Angelica. What will the trend be in the Christian children's book market, in your opinion?
I don't know. I know we're seeing a big bounce at the moment. We published a book, I think 2 years ago, by an African-American author called Trillian Newbell, called God's Very Good Idea. And it's about race and diversity for children. And it has just gone berserk for us in the last 2 weeks, in a good way. We sold through a year's stock in a week. reprinting madly. It's the right book by the right author at the
right moment.
And we're all running around behind the scenes madly trying to keep it in stock and in the right place. So I mean, we'll see some of these bounces and some depressions in other types of Christian book. I mean, I would always say there is a great future for all kinds of publishing that is done intelligently. That's, you know, our watchwords are a good book company book has to be biblical, based on the Bible and expounding and explaining something that's in Scripture. It has to be accessible. In other words, we're less. I know that SPCK and Sam does a lot more academic end titles. We're much more about, you know, the ordinary Christian in church. But importantly, it has to be relevant, and it's got to connect with what's going on in people's lives at the moment. And I think for children's books, that you know, that means, you know, thinking how to communicate God's word and the great stories in the Bible in a way that's up to date and modern and connects and is well illustrated in ways that children will relate to. Yeah, I think there's a good future for all Christian books that kind of follow those key.
It's encouraging
Trends.
Sam, and I think we have a question for you as well.
Yeah,
Sam,
just picking up very briefly on the children's piece. I think one thing that'll be interesting to see is traditionally we've relied on this quite complicated supply chain of co-edition books, whereby a publisher, normally an English language publisher, will print for 5 or 6 different languages at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting to see whether there begins to be, or whether there continues to be a bit of a shift towards a more licensing kind of model, where people can print more locally to meet demand as it occurs, rather than relying on complex supply chains. I think that'll be an interesting piece to see in the medium term, whether that starts to emerge, but I don't have an immediate view on it. Tony has asked about online events. Do we plan to set these up, or are you participating in third-party events? And I think it's probably a both and from us, and I suspect it is from Tim as well. I think we've been involved in supporting the Spring Harvest event, which we did the official book for, and that shifted several thousand copies in the space of 2 or 3 days, with promotion through the Spring Harvest YouTube. And I know they were really happy with the numbers that they had at their event, and I think that's provided a bit of evidence that the big events can continue to shift books. But I think we're also looking to do our own events in terms of book launches, that kind of thing. We had a really successful launch for the NIV Bible Speaks Today Bible, where we had 4 different speakers, high-profile speakers who normally would have been difficult to get together in one place. But using a Facebook-based event, we were able to get them together, and it's really interesting to sort of see the comments as they come in live on the event, and to be able to see the numbers that you have hundreds, and then someone starts speaking a bit more slowly, and suddenly those numbers dip a bit, and then they bounce back up, and it can be quite addictive. But I think the shift to online events and I guess online church is going to be very significant, and thinking about how we can support that as publishers as things move towards a sort of, I suspect the long term will be some kind of dual economy. How we can best support that as publishers is an important question for us.
Thank you.
One of the things we have in the UK a couple of sales guys who are directly responsible for direct to church sales. And one of the things they've been involved in is, because so many churches have been live streaming their meetings, we've discovered this opportunity to do little book reviews segments on video. And they've been busy just recording a tiny little segment, which is about to review a book and to recommend a book, which they then sent out to all the churches that we're working with. And many of them just slot them into their meetings as part of their meetings. So that's been a useful tool in this time.
So in a way, we're getting closer to our audience because of being so digital. And Angelica has a question. She's writing, I like your definition of what a publisher is. Would you kindly write it down for us all to share? So
Well,
what would be your definition of the publisher? Tim, Sam? It seems evident to us, but maybe we should.
Well, the word publisher. I mean, it comes directly. I mean, it's a Bible word, isn't it? It comes from the word kerasso, proclamation. Some old versions of the Bible used publisher instead of proclaim, basically proclamation. But it's effectively about communication, and anyone who works in professional communication knows that there are two major parts to it, which is one, the message and the way that you format it yourself for presentation, and two, just gathering an audience, understanding what an audience needs, and delivering the message to them in a way that really impacts them. Now, I think Christian publishing, the kind of Christian publishing that Sam and I are involved in, is no different from anything else. It's just the procedures are slightly more complicated. But it's why I said earlier that someone who is simply focusing on, here's the message I want and here's how I want to say it, isn't really a publisher. Even if you're producing a book with the content that you really want in, that's not really publishing. That's making a book. It's getting that book so that an audience understands what it is, surrounding it, getting the messages right about how and connecting an audience to that title, as well as delivering it to them with all those sort of standard ways that we call marketing. Getting a product they understand at a price that they think is good value, having it in a place where they can buy it, whether that's online or in a bookshop, with the messages, the promotion that means that they see it and they go, oh, I know what that's about, and I know that that's something that will benefit me, and oh look, it's a good price, and I'm willing to pay that for that. So it's an end-to-end thing.
Yeah. Sam, do you have to add something to this description?
Yeah, I think Tim used the word connector, and I think that's our sort of standard answer for this, is that we're there to connect an author and their work with a market. And I think there's also a curating role there, that we're there to curate the author's work and make sure it's as biblical and as relevant to that market as it possibly can be. And two more C's. I think it's about being creative and being commercial. If you've just got one of those two, I think it's going to be a struggle. And what excites me about publishing, and I guess the reason I've spent my career in it, is that interconnection between the creative and the commercial, and that's how all the really good publishing comes about. I think I'd just add that it's bigger than just book publishing for us. We find we've just had the Thy Kingdom Come app out, which has had 20,000 downloads and has really connected into a lot of people's lives and had them praying through evangelism. And the more digital kind of approaches can sometimes be more difficult to monetize, but I think they can sometimes be monetized, and there's often the kind of content that might be better suited to a blog, or it might be better suited to a podcast than it might be to a book. And I think our skills as curators and connectors can take us further than just books.
And I'd say that the publisher is, like for me, is always a translator, because you have to translate the author's message. You have to translate the book to the readers in the most economical way. So for me, publishing is always a kind of translation. though you're publishing in the same language the book is written. Maybe something like this. Well, I think our time is up, and we answered all the questions. And if our attendees will be having more questions, they can email them to Media Associates International Europe. There is our email on the web page, and there is our email on the Facebook page, and we can pass the questions to the panelists if you have any questions, any ideas after the meeting is over. So thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Sam. Thank you to all the attendees. And we see each other tomorrow at 10:30 Central European Time. And tomorrow we'll be talking about post-COVID spirituality. Thank you.
Great to see you. Live long and prosper.
God bless.
Bye.